My mother arrived at the funeral home not to mourn, but to manage the narrative, loudly whispering that I was a stranger to my own grandmother to justify cutting me out. She thought her performance would secure the estate. She didn't know that the priest held a final letter from the deceased, a letter that contained the house keys, the ring, and the ruin of my mother's reputation. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. The silence in the house was the loudest thing I had ever heard. For 5 years, this old Victorian home had been a symphony of small, necessary sounds. The rhythmic hiss of the oxygen machine, the clink of ceramic teacups on coasters, the shuffle of Nana Rose's slippers against the hardwood, and the soft, breathless rasp of her voice telling me stories about a world that moved slower than the one outside her window. Now, the machinery was off. The slippers were empty by the side of the bed. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, pressing against my eardrums like deep water. I was sitting in the wingback chair in the corner of her bedroom, my body aching with a fatigue that went beyond the physical. It was a bone-deep exhaustion, the kind that accumulates after 1,000 sleepless nights of listening for a cough or a cry of pain. My eyes were gritty, swollen from tears that had finally run dry an hour ago. I looked at my hands, resting in my lap. They were chapped from constant washing, from wringing out cool cloths for her forehead. They were the hands of a caretaker, rough and utilitarian. The phone on the bedside table buzzed, vibrating against the polished wood. The sound made me jump, my nerves frayed like old wires. I stared at the screen. Mom. The name flashed with a demand that felt intrusive in this sanctuary of grief. I hadn't spoken to my mother, Lydia, in 6 months. She hadn't visited in 2 years. Her last visit had been a 20-minute whirlwind where she complained about the smell of old people, asked Nana if she still had her diamond brooch, and then left because she had a brunch reservation she couldn't miss. I picked up the phone, my thumb hovering over the green button. I took a breath, inhaling the scent of lavender and antiseptic that clung to the room, trying to borrow some of Nana's strength. "Hello," my voice cracked. I sounded weak, fragile, I hated it. "Elena," Lydia's voice was sharp, clear, and utterly devoid of the somber tone one expects when death has just walked through the door. "The hospice nurse called me. Is it true? Is she actually gone?" She didn't say Mom. She didn't say Nana. She said she. As if Nana Rose were an object, a piece of furniture that had finally been moved out of the way. "Yes," I whispered, looking at the empty bed, the quilt perfectly smoothed down, the final service I had performed for her. "She passed about 2 hours ago, peacefully. I was holding her hand." "Okay, listen," Lydia cut in, the pace of her speech accelerating. "I'm already on the highway. I've got Marcus with me. We'll be there in 2 hours. Don't touch anything. And I mean anything, Elena. Don't start packing, don't start looking through drawers. You know how you get." The accusation hit me like a physical slap. How I get? I was the archivist. I was the one who preserved things. I was the one who had cataloged Nana's old photos when her eyesight failed, describing every face in the albums until she smiled in recognition. "I'm not looting the house, Mother," I said, my grip on the phone tightening until my knuckles turned white. "I'm grieving. I'm waiting for the funeral home to come." "Just wait for us," she snapped. "And make sure the front door is unlocked. I don't want to be standing on the porch ringing the bell like a visitor at my own mother's house. We need to assess the situation immediately." "Assess the situation?" I repeated. The absurdity of the phrase tasted like ash in my mouth. "Mom, she just died. There is no situation to assess. There is a funeral to plan." "There is always a situation, Elena," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial, patronizing low. "You wouldn't understand. You've been playing nursemaid for so long you've probably lost touch with the real world. Just sit tight. We'll handle the heavy lifting now. You've done enough." The line went dead. I lowered the phone, staring at the black screen. "You've done enough." It wasn't a thank you. It was a dismissal. It was a firing. I stood up, my legs trembling slightly, and walked over to the vanity mirror. I looked at my reflection. Dark circles bruised the skin under my eyes. My hair was pulled back in a messy, practical bun. I wore an oversized cardigan that smelled like Nana's rosewater perfume. I looked like a ghost. But beneath the exhaustion, something cold began to crystallize in my chest. It was the realization of what was coming. Lydia and Uncle Marcus weren't coming to mourn. They were coming to harvest. They were coming for the Victorian house in the historic district. They were coming for the jewelry box. They were coming for the antique furniture. For 5 years, I had been the daughter Nana Rose deserved, while her actual children were ghosts who only materialized when they needed money. Now that she was gone, they were rushing in to reclaim a place they had abandoned. I looked back at the empty bed. "They think I'm weak, Nana," I whispered to the empty room. "They think I'm just the help." The betrayal wasn't just that they hadn't been here. The betrayal was that they were coming now, not to say goodbye, but to erase me. And as the sound of a heavy luxury car crunching over the gravel driveway drifted up through the window, I realized that the grief was about to be overshadowed by a war I wasn't sure I had the strength to fight. The betrayal was worse than the diagnosis itself, because the diagnosis was natural. This was deliberate cruelty. The next 48 hours were a blur of aggressive movement and calculated exclusion. My mother and Uncle Marcus swept into the house like a storm front, bringing with them a chaotic energy that shattered the stillness I had carefully maintained for Nana Rose. They didn't cry. Not once. Instead, they walked through the rooms with their eyes scanning the walls, the shelves, the floorboards, assessing value rather than memories. I was sitting at the kitchen table, nursing a cup of tea that had gone cold hours ago, watching them. They were in the dining room, discussing the upcoming wake and funeral service. They hadn't invited me to join the discussion. I was within earshot, physically present, but they spoke about me as if I were a piece of furniture that needed to be moved into storage. "We need to make sure the obituary lists us prominently," Lydia said, her voice echoing off the hardwood floors. She was wearing a sharp black blazer that looked expensive, but I knew she had likely charged it to a credit card that was maxed out. "Lydia and Marcus, her devoted children, that needs to be the headline. We can mention Elena further down. Survived by a granddaughter, or something vague." "Right," Marcus agreed, his voice booming. He was a large man who occupied space with an arrogance that hadn't been earned. "We don't want people getting the wrong idea about who was actually in charge here. If we list Elena too high up, people might think she has decision-making power over the estate. We need to present a united front to the executor." My stomach twisted. They were rewriting the narrative in real time. I stood up, the chair scraping loudly against the linoleum, hoping to remind them of my presence. I walked to the doorway of the dining room. "I wrote a draft of the obituary," I said, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. "I wrote it last week when Nana was sleeping. She actually proofread it. She wanted it to talk about her work in the community garden, her years as a teacher. She didn't care about the order of names." Lydia turned to me, her expression freezing into a mask of pitying condescension. She took a sip of her bottled water. She refused to drink the tap water in the house and sighed. "Elena, honey," she began, using the tone one might use with a slow child. "That's very sweet, really, but Nana wasn't in her right mind at the end. We all know that. You can't rely on what she said or proofread while she was on all those medications. We need a formal obituary, one that reflects the family's stature. Marcus and I will handle the press. Why don't you go? I don't know, organize the linens? We'll need to donate a lot of this old junk." "It's not junk," I said, feeling the heat rise in my cheeks. And she was lucid until the very end. She knew exactly who was here holding her hand and who wasn't. Marcus chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "Now, Elena, don't get emotional. We know you were here. You had a free place to stay for 5 years. No rent, no bills. It was a transaction. You traded your time for a roof over your head. Don't act like you were a martyr. You got plenty out of this arrangement." The air left the room. A transaction. They saw 5 years of bedpans, spoon-feeding, reading aloud, and holding a dying woman through terrifying nights of pain as a rental agreement. I had a job, I said quietly. I had an apartment. I gave them up to be here because you two wouldn't come. We have careers, Elena, Lydia snapped, her patience evaporating. Real responsibilities. We couldn't just drop everything to play nurse. Now, please, we are trying to plan a funeral that honors Mother properly. Step aside. I retreated. There was no point in shouting. They were impervious to shame. I went back to the kitchen, my sanctuary, and looked out the window at the overgrown rose garden Nan and I had tended together. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was Father Thomas, the priest from St. Jude S. He had been Nana's confessor and friend for 30 years. Elena, his warm voice filled my ear. I'm just calling to check on you. I saw your mother's car in the driveway when I drove past. How are you holding up? They're erasing me, Father, I confessed, a tear finally escaping and tracking hot down my cheek. They're planning the funeral like a press conference. They're treating the house like a liquidation sale. They think I was just here for free rent. Father Thomas paused. The silence on the line was heavy with meaning. Elena, listen to me carefully. Your grandmother was a wise woman. She saw everything. She saw the empty chairs at Christmas. She saw who answered the phone and who didn't. She and I had a very long meeting 3 weeks ago. I remember, I said. She made me leave the room. She said it was a confession. It was more than a confession, Father Thomas said, his voice dropping. She gave me something, a letter, and specific instructions on when to read it. She knew this would happen, Elena. She knew exactly how Lydia and Marcus would behave. What does the letter say? I asked, my heart hammering against my ribs. I cannot tell you yet, he said gently. But I need you to be strong. Let them plan their pageant. Let them write their obituary. Let them sit in the front row. You just need to be there. Do not let them bully you into staying home. They won't want me to speak, I said. They've already made that clear. They won't have a choice, Father Thomas replied, a hint of steel entering his benevolent tone. The service is in my church, and in my church we honor the wishes of the dead, not the egos of the living. I hung up the phone, a strange sensation washing over me. It wasn't relief, exactly. It was anticipation. I looked back toward the dining room, where I could hear Lydia arguing with Marcus about whether they could sell the antique silver service before probate cleared. They were so confident, so loud. They thought they held all the cards because they shared Nana's DNA. But they had forgotten one crucial thing: love isn't genetic. It's earned. And Nana Rose, the woman who had taught me to read, to garden, and to listen, had one final lesson left to teach them. To understand why the coming funeral was not just a ceremony but a battlefield, you have to understand the history of the house on Elm Street. For me, it was a refuge. When my father left when I was 10, and Lydia fell into a deep depression that manifested as neglect, Nana Rose took me in. I spent my weekends there. I spent my summers there. While Lydia was chasing new boyfriends or investment opportunities that usually ended in debt, Nana was teaching me how to catalog books in her library, how to distinguish between a weed and a wildflower, and how to sit in silence without feeling lonely. When Nana got sick 5 years ago, a slow, creeping autoimmune condition that stole her mobility inch by inch, Lydia didn't even visit the hospital. She sent flowers. A massive, expensive arrangement that withered within 3 days because it was too big for the vase. That was Lydia. Flashy, expensive, and short-lived. I was 24, fresh out of my master's program in archival science, starting a promising job at the State Museum. I quit. I moved in. I became the archivist of her final years. Now, seeing Lydia standing in Nana's living room, I saw the antagonist of my life in high definition. Lydia was 55, but fought to look 40 with a desperation that was painful to watch. Her hair was dyed a fierce, unnatural blonde, and she wore jewelry that was too heavy for the occasion, gold chains that clanked when she moved. She was a woman who defined herself by what she owned, and she was currently terrifyingly liquidity poor. I knew from family gossip that her latest business venture, a boutique skincare line, had tanked. She was drowning in debt. Nana's estate wasn't just an inheritance to her, it was a lifeline. And then there was Uncle Marcus. He was the younger sibling, the baby who had never been told no. He worked in consulting, a vague term that seemed to involve a lot of golf and very little income. He wore a suit that was slightly too tight, his face flushed with the low-level aggression of a mediocre man who believes the world owes him a living. "Elena," Lydia's voice snapped me out of my reverie. I walked into the living room. She was holding a crystal vase, turning it over in her hands to check the maker's mark on the bottom. "Yes," I asked, keeping my distance. "Where is the jewelry box?" she demanded, not looking up. "The mahogany one. It used to sit on the highboy in her bedroom. It's not there." "I put it in the safe," I lied smoothly. It wasn't a lie, technically. I had moved it to a secure location, but not a safe they had the combination to. Nana asked me to secure it. When the hospice workers started coming in and out. "Well, get it," Marcus said, stepping forward. "We need to inventory the contents for the estate valuation." "The estate lawyer isn't here," I said, crossing my arms. "We shouldn't be inventorying anything without an executor present. It's not legal." Lydia set the vase down with a dangerous clatter. She walked over to me, invading my personal space. She smelled of expensive perfume and stale coffee. "Let's get something straight," she hissed, her eyes narrowing. "You are not the gatekeeper here. You are the granddaughter, I am the daughter, I am the next of kin. This is my house now. These are my things. You were just the help, Elena. Don't confuse your proximity with ownership. You were a glorified nursemaid. And honestly, I think you dragged it out. If she had been in a proper facility, she might have been more comfortable." The cruelty of it took my breath away. "I dragged it out," I repeated, my voice shaking. "I kept her alive. I kept her happy. She died in her own bed, listening to her favorite music, holding my hand. Where were you, Mom? Where were you when she was crying for you 2 years ago? Oh, that's right. You were in Cabo." Lydia's face hardened. "I have a life. I don't expect you to understand that, hiding away in this dusty old mausoleum. Now, give me the code to the safe, or so help me, I will call the police and have you removed for theft." "You can't kick me out," I said, standing my ground. "I have residency." "Residency ends when the owner dies," Marcus chimed in, checking his watch. "Look, Elena, don't make this ugly. We're willing to cut you a check. $5,000 for your services, a severance package. Take it, pack your bags, and let the adults handle the estate." $5,000. The estate was worth millions. The house alone in this market was a fortune, but it wasn't about the money for me. It was about protecting Nana's legacy from these vultures who would sell her wedding ring to pay off a car lease. "I'm not taking your money," I said quietly. "And I'm not leaving until after the funeral. The priest is expecting me." Lydia laughed, a sharp barking sound. "The priest? Father Thomas, please, he's an employee of the church. I've already spoken to him about the donation we plan to make from the estate. He knows who butters the bread. You can come to the funeral, Elena, but you sit in the back, you stay quiet, and you do not embarrass us. If you cause a scene, you won't even get the $5,000. You'll get nothing." She turned her back on me, dismissing me as a threat. She went back to examining the vase. "Marcus, Google this maker's mark. I think it's Waterford." I looked at their backs. They were so sure of their power. They saw me as a mouse, quiet, small, easily crushed. They didn't realize that mice see everything. Mice know where the foundations are weak. And they certainly didn't know that the mouse had spent 5 years archiving not just Nana's books, but her thoughts, her wishes, and her secrets. That night, the house felt like occupied territory. Lydia and Marcus had taken over the master suite, Nana's room, which felt like a desecration. I had retreated to the small guest room in the attic, the space I had lived in for 5 years. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Lydia's hand touching Nana's things, her fingers appraising the weight of the silver, the cut of the crystal. I needed to be sure. Father Thomas had hinted at a plan, but hints weren't enough to quell the panic rising in my chest. I needed to be strategic. I was an archivist. My entire skill set was built on research, verification, and finding the truth hidden in documents. I opened my laptop and logged into the county clerk's website. I wanted to check the deed to the house. Lydia had claimed it was her house now. But Nana was meticulous. If she had changed something, there might be a record. I searched for Rosemary Sterling. The deed popped up. It was dated from 40 years ago, no recent transfers. That worried me. If the deed was still in Nana's name, it would go to probate. And in probate, without a specific will stating otherwise, the assets usually flowed to the direct children. Lydia and Marcus. My heart sank. Had Nana forgotten? Had she meant to protect me but run out of time? Then I remembered something. 2 years ago, Nana had a lawyer visit. Mr. Henderson, a severe, quiet man who wore boaties. Lydia and Marcus didn't know about him. Nana had told them she was having a Bible study that afternoon so they wouldn't interrupt via phone. I dug through my filing cabinet, the real one, hidden under a pile of old blankets in the back of my closet. I found the file labeled Medical Legal. Inside was a business card for Henderson and Associates, estate planning. I looked at the clock. It was 2:00 a.m. I couldn't call, but I could email. I drafted a message, my fingers flying across the keys. D. Our Mr. Henderson, Nana Rose passed away yesterday. Lydia and Marcus are here. They are claiming ownership of everything and threatening to evict me. Father Thomas mentioned a letter. Please, tell me there is a will. Tell me she didn't leave this house to them. They are already pricing the furniture. I hit send, feeling a momentary sense of agency. Then, I opened a second file on my computer. During the long afternoons when Nana slept, I had started digitizing her journals. She had asked me to, so my memories don't turn to dust, she had said. I scrolled to the entries from the last year. Entry October 14th. Lydia called today, asked for money again, said she needed it for a bridge loan. I told her no. She screamed at me, called me a selfish old woman. She doesn't know I can hear the desperation in her voice. She is drowning. I worry what she will do when I am gone. I must protect Elena. Elena is the only one who loves the garden, not the land value. Entry December 2nd. Marcus visited. He didn't stay for tea. He walked around the property with a measuring tape. He thought I was asleep. I heard him on the phone saying, "We can subdivide the lot. Put up 2 condos. They will destroy it all. I have made my decision. Henderson was here. It is done." I read the words over and over. It is done. She hadn't forgotten. She had prepared. The next morning, I woke up to the smell of bacon. It was jarring. Nana and I usually had oatmeal. I went downstairs to find Lydia holding court in the kitchen, cooking a massive breakfast for herself and Marcus. "Oh, look who's up," Lydia said, flipping a pancake. "We have a meeting with the funeral director at 10:00. You can come, but let me do the talking. We want top of the line. Casket, flowers, everything. We need to make a statement." "Who is paying for it?" I asked, pouring myself coffee. "The estate, obviously," Marcus said, his mouth full. "Will be reimbursed as soon as the accounts are unfrozen." My phone pinged, an email notification. Henderson and Associates. I opened it under the table, my heart pounding. "Dear Elena, my condolences. Do not worry. The will is ironclad. I am the executor, not your mother. I will see you at the service. Stay quiet until then. Let them dig their own hole. Regards, Mr. Henderson." A wave of relief so profound it made me dizzy washed over me. Let them dig their own hole. I looked up at Lydia. She was talking about ordering a casket made of mahogany with gold inlays. She was talking about a reception at the country club, a club Nana hated. She was spending money she didn't have, banking on an inheritance that wasn't coming. I set my mug down. I decided to play the part they wanted, the passive, defeated mouse. "Okay," I said softly. "I'll just sit in the back. I won't get in the way." Lydia smiled, a predatory, satisfied grin. Good girl, see. It's easier when you just accept your place in the hierarchy. Much easier, I agreed, hiding the small, sharp smile that threatened to break through. I'll go get ready. As I walked up the stairs, I heard Marcus say, "Finally, she's broken." That was easier than I thought. They had no idea. The trap was set, and they were walking right into it, one greedy step at a time. The day of the funeral was gray and weeping, the sky matching the somber mood of the town, or at least, the mood of everyone except my family. The church was filling up. Nana Rose had been a pillar of the community for 50 years. Teachers, neighbors, former students, and fellow gardeners filled the pews. Lydia and Marcus had arrived in a rented limousine. They stood at the entrance of the church, acting like celebrities on a red carpet. Lydia was wearing a black dress that was too tight and a hat with a veil that was purely theatrical. She was greeting people, shaking hands, accepting condolences for a loss she didn't feel. Thank you, she was saying to Mrs. Higgins, the town librarian. It's been so hard. We were with her until the end, of course. A beautiful passing. I stood 10 feet away, invisible in my simple gray dress. Mrs. Higgins looked over Lydia's shoulder and caught my eye. She gave me a sad, knowing smile. She knew. Everyone who actually knew Nana knew the truth. I moved to enter the sanctuary, but Marcus stepped in front of me, blocking the aisle. Remember the plan, Elena, he whispered, his breath smelling of mints and stale scotch. Back row, far corner, away from the cameras. Cameras? I asked, confused. We hired a videographer, he said smugly. For the memorial website, we don't want you crying and making a mess in the frame. You look tired. It ruins the aesthetic. I'm sitting where Father Thomas tells me to sit, I said, trying to step around him. Lydia appeared at his side, grabbing my arm. Her fingernails dug into my skin. Listen to me, you ungrateful little leech, she hissed, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper so the guests wouldn't hear. We are tall. Errating you here, don't push it. If you try to sit in the front pew, the family pew, I will have security escort you out. Don't think I won't. Security, I looked around. There were 2 large men in suits standing by the door. She had actually hired bouncers for her mother's funeral. Fine, I said, pulling my arm free. I'll sit where I belong. Good, Lydia smoothed her dress. And wipe that smug look off your face. You have nothing to be smug about. Tomorrow morning, the realtor is coming to put the sign up. You need to be packed by noon. The realtor might have trouble with that, I said, unable to resist a small jab. What is that supposed to mean? Lydia narrowed her eyes. Just that. Old houses have secrets, Mom. You should check the foundation before you try to sell. I walked away before she could respond, heading into the nave. I didn't go to the back row. I walked down the side aisle and found a seat in the 3rd row, behind the choir, partially obscured by a pillar, but close enough to hear everything. The service began. It was a surreal display of narcissism. Lydia went up to the lectern to give the eulogy. She didn't talk about Nana's kindness or her love of poetry. She talked about herself. She talked about how hard it was to be a working mother with an aging parent whom she never visited. She talked about the burden of care, which she never carried. Mother was difficult, Lydia said, fake tears shimmering in her eyes. But Marcus and I, we bore it with grace. We made sure she had the best of everything. A murmur went through the crowd. The people here knew. They knew who had pushed the wheelchair to Mass every Sunday. They knew who had picked up the prescriptions. Lydia finished and returned to the front pew, dabbing her eyes with a lace handkerchief. Marcus patted her hand. They looked triumphant. They had successfully staged the play. Then Father Thomas stepped up to the pulpit. He looked out over the congregation, his face stern. He adjusted his glasses and looked directly at Lydia and Marcus. Thank you, Lydia, for those words, he said, his tone dry. Rosemary was indeed a woman of strong character, and she was a woman of preparation. Before we conclude the service, there is one final piece of business. Rosemary left specific instructions that upon her passing, a final letter was to be read, not by me, but by the person she entrusted with her heart. Lydia sat up straighter, looking confused. She looked at Marcus. She requested that her granddaughter, Elena, come forward. Father Thomas's voice boomed through the church. The silence was absolute. Lydia turned around, her eyes scanning the back of the church, looking for me. Her face was a mask of shock and fury. I stood up from the third row. The sound of my heels clicking on the stone floor was the only sound in the massive room. I walked past the family pew. Lydia lunged slightly as if to grab me, but Marcus held her back, his eyes darting to the videographer. They couldn't cause a scene now, not on camera. I stepped up to the pulpit. Father Thomas smiled at me and handed me a thick, cream-colored envelope. It was sealed with Nana's wax seal, a rose. I took the microphone. My hands were shaking, but my voice was steady. I looked at the congregation, then down at Lydia and Marcus. Nana didn't want a eulogy from me, I said into the mic. She said I listened to her enough while she was alive. She wanted me to read this to you. I broke the seal. Lydia half rose from her seat, her face turning a blotchy red. "This is inappropriate," she hissed loudly. "This is not part of the program." "Sit down, Lydia," Father Thomas said, his voice cutting through the air like a whip. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a command from God's representative. Lydia sank back down, stunned. I unfolded the letter. The handwriting was shaky, written in the last weeks, but legible. "My dearest friends and family," I began reading. "If you are hearing this, I have passed on. I hope the flowers are beautiful. I hope Lydia didn't buy the expensive lilies. I always hated the smell." A ripple of laughter went through the church. Lydia stiffened. "I am writing this because I know my children," I read. "I know that when I am gone, they will tell you stories. They will tell you they were devoted. They will tell you they cared. But the truth is, I haven't seen my son Marcus in 3 years, except when he came to ask for a loan for a boat. And I haven't seen my daughter Lydia since she came to raid my jewelry box for a gala last Christmas." Gasps echoed in the sanctuary. This wasn't just a letter, it was an indictment. Lydia was shaking her head frantically, mouthing lies, lies to the people around her. Marcus looked like he was about to vomit. "I forgive them," the letter continued, "because they are who they are, but forgiveness does not mean foolishness. I know that they are currently planning to sell my home. I know they are. Counting on the inheritance to pay debts they incurred living lives they could not afford." I looked up. Lydia's face was pale, her eyes wide with panic. She realized what was happening. The clever trap wasn't a legal loophole, it was the truth delivered publicly. "Therefore," I read, my voice gaining strength, "I have made arrangements. The house on Elm Street does not belong to the estate. 2 years ago, I placed the deed into a living trust." Lydia let out a small, strangled noise. "The trust is irrevocable," I read. "And the sole beneficiary of the trust is the person who sat with me through the nights, who washed my hair when I could not, and who loved me for me, not for my assets. The house, and everything in it, belongs to my granddaughter, Elena." "No," Lydia screamed, forgetting the cameras, forgetting the decorum. She stood up, pointing a shaking finger at me. "That's a lie. She manipulated her. She's a thief. That's undue influence." Mr. Henderson, the lawyer with the Bodies, stood up from a pew near the front. He held up a briefcase. "I have the documents right here, Mrs. Sterling. Notarized, witnessed, and filed with the county. The video testimony of your mother signing them, while fully of sound mind, is also on file." Marcus slumped in the pew, his head in his hands. He knew the game was over. But the letter wasn't finished. "There is one more thing," I read. "The ring, my diamond engagement ring. Lydia, I know you have been looking for it." Lydia froze. She had been tearing the house apart looking for that ring. It was worth $50,000. "I am not buried with it," the letter said, "and it is not in the safe. I gave it to Father Thomas for safekeeping." Father Thomas reached into his vestment pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. He opened it, revealing the massive, sparkling diamond. "She told me to give this to Elena," Father Thomas said into his own microphone. "But she also left a note for you, Lydia." He pulled a small slip of paper from the box. The note says, "Lydia, you always wanted this ring. You said it would look beautiful on your hand. But this ring represents a promise kept, a commitment through sickness and health. You broke every promise you made to me as a daughter. Elena kept them all. The ring goes where the loyalty lived." Lydia let out a wail, not of grief, but of pure, materialistic loss. She looked at the crowd, desperate for an ally. But the faces looking back at her were cold. The mask had slipped. Everyone saw the greed, the neglect, the ugliness beneath the designer clothes. The tension in the church was electric. This was the climax, the moment where the antagonist is stripped bare. Lydia, realizing she had lost the audience, lost the house, and lost the ring, turned her fury on me. She marched up the steps to the pulpit, her heels clacking aggressively. The security guards she had hired shifted, unsure of what to do. "You witch," she screamed, grabbing the microphone stand. "You poisoned her against us. You spent 5 years whispering in her ear, turning her into a hateful old woman. You stole my inheritance." "I didn't steal anything, Mom," I said, my voice calm, amplified through the speakers. I didn't step back. I stood my ground. I earned it. I paid for this house with 5 years of my life. I paid for it with love. You wanted it for free. "It's my birthright," she shrieked, grabbing my arm. "No," I said, pulling away. "Being a daughter is a relationship, not a financial transaction. You stopped being a daughter a long time ago. You became a creditor. And Nana closed the account." "I will sue you," she yelled, her face contorted. "I will tie this up in court for years. You'll never see a dime. I'll ruin you." Mr. Henderson stepped forward again, his voice projecting clearly. "Mrs. Sterling, if you contest the trust, there is a no contest clause. If you sue and lose, which you will, given the evidence, you will be responsible for all legal fees. Furthermore, the trust stipulates that any remaining cash in the estate, about $10,000, is to go to you and Marcus. But if you contest the will, that amount is forfeited and goes to the local animal shelter." Lydia stopped. Her mouth opened and closed. $10,000. It was a pittance compared to the millions she wanted, but it was something, and she was broke. She looked at Marcus. Marcus stood up slowly. He looked defeated. "Lydia," he said quietly, "sit down, it's over." "It's not over," she screamed at him. "She humiliated us." "We humiliated ourselves," Marcus said, a moment of rare clarity breaking through his greed. He looked at the congregation, seeing the judgment in their eyes. "Sit down." Lydia looked around. She saw the videographer she had hired, zooming in on her face. She saw the neighbors shaking their heads. She saw the priest looking at her with divine disapproval. She crumbled. The fight went out of her. She began to sob ugly, heavy. NG sobs of a woman who has realized she is the villain of the story. "I just wanted," she whimpered. "I just needed." "I know," I said softly, stepping away from the mic so only she could hear. "You needed the money, but you needed a mother too, and you missed her. You missed her entirely." I turned back to the microphone. "The service is concluded," I said. "Please join us at the house, my house, for the reception. Everyone is welcome, except those who only came for the inventory." I walked down the steps. The congregation stood up, but they didn't leave. As I walked down the aisle, Mrs. Higgins started to clap. A slow, respectful applause, then others joined in. It wasn't applause for a performance, it was applause for justice. I walked past Lydia, who was slumped on the stairs of the altar, and out into the cool, gray afternoon. The rain had stopped. The reception at the house was warm and full of life. The people who truly loved Nana filled the rooms, drinking tea from her mismatched cups and sharing stories about her garden. The house felt different. The oppressive energy of Lydia and Marcus was gone. It felt like my home. Lydia and Marcus didn't come to the reception. They had fled the church moments after I left, driving away in their rented limousine to whatever financial reckoning awaited them. Mr. Henderson found me in the kitchen. He handed me a set of keys. "The locks have already been changed," he said with a rare smile. "I took the liberty of sending a locksmith over during the service. Lydia's key won't work anymore. Thank you, Mr. Henderson, I said, taking the heavy brass key. It felt warm in my hand. She was very proud of you, Elena, he said. She told me that you were the only one who ever really listened to the silence. She knew you would know what to do with this house. I'm going to keep the garden, I said, and the library. Good, he said. Oh, and one more thing, Lydia's debts. They are significant. She will likely have to declare bankruptcy. She may try to contact you for help. I looked out the window at the rose bushes, resilient and thorny. She can contact me, I said, but the Bank of Nana Rose is closed. If she wants to visit, she can come for tea, but she leaves her purse at the door. Later that evening, when everyone had left, I sat in the wingback chair in Nana's room. I held the ring in my hand, watching it catch the light. I put it on. It fit perfectly. I wasn't rich in the way Lydia wanted to be rich. I didn't have a yacht or a penthouse, but I had this house. I had my memories. And I had the vindication of knowing that loyalty, in the end, was the only currency that mattered. I took out my phone and deleted the draft of the obituary Lydia had written. I opened a new file and began to type. Rosemary Sterling, beloved grandmother, teacher, and gardener. She is survived by her garden, her books, and her granddaughter, Elena, who will keep the gate open for those who know how to listen. I closed the laptop. The silence in the house wasn't heavy anymore. It was peaceful. It was mine.